Hello everybody. So I wanted to do a quick video on winter hive prep and what I do for winter preparedness for my bees. I have been getting a lot of questions sent to me via Facebook Messenger about my winter hive prep that I do with my bees and what other people should do, in my opinion, with their bees. So there's three main things that I do with my bees and with my hives to get them prepared for winter. The very first thing that I do that I feel is very important is mite treatments. And mite treatments are not just a winter hive prep that I do. Mite treatments are sometimes a consistent thing starting in the spring right up until fall and winter. Starting probably around mid-August, early September, when I'm done harvesting honey for the year, I threw on Apicard trays on all of my hives. They all got an Apicard tray. An Apicard kills mites that are active not only on the outside of the brood, but it supposedly soaks in and helps kill mites within the brood cells also. So I did a round of Apicard on every single hive. And after the Apicard treatments, I did oxalic acid vapor treatments on every hive every single week after the Apicard trays came out. So I think I'm on round 7 of my OAV treatments, and those are doing very well for me. I have actually put mite boards underneath my screen bottom boards, did the OAV treatments, pulled out the mite boards, and had dead mites on those boards. So I know the OAV is working on my beehives. So I'm on round 7, like I said, I believe. It is September 30th. I'm going to continue to do the OAV treatment right up until it's cold enough that I'm not comfortable doing it anymore. And that's probably when the temperatures stay in the low mid-50s. As long as it's maintaining a temperature in the 60s, I'm going to continue to do those treatments. Come on, Bruno. Come here. Bruno's going to get stung. So mite treatments are very important. If you have a high mite load going into the winter season, your bees are probably going to die off from just the mites alone. So make sure you're doing mite treatments, not just in the fall, not just in the winter, all season long. The second thing that is extremely important going into winter, your bees need enough food to be able to feed off of just the honey stores from late October on through probably March or April. So you got to have extremely heavy honey boxes, extremely heavy brood boxes. They have to be full of honey. You should not be able to go out and easily lift any of your boxes. Right now, my bottom box on all of my hives is heavy enough that I have to rest it on my legs and tilt it just to get it to lift. They're so heavy. They're probably 60 to 80 pounds. They're extremely heavy. And every box from there up is packed and extremely heavy. Your bees will eat more or less food depending on what kind of honeybees you have and what kind of weather we have. If we have a warmer winter, your bees are more likely to eat more honey. If we have an extremely cold winter, your bees are less likely to eat as much honey. So the more active the bees are through the winter season, the more honey they're going to eat. I have been feeding sugar water, mixed heavier than just the 1-to-1 ratio. I'm feeding a heavy mix of sugar water, and I started that at the beginning of September, and I'm not going to quit until the bees stop taking the sugar water. I feed it via 5-gallon chicken waterers. I fill those up. I usually have 2 or 3 at a time going, so they've got a lot of sugar water going. They've had plenty of opportunity now to store that sugar water or honey based off me feeding them. So you have to have mite treatment, you have to have gobs of sugar water or honey stores, and the third thing that is extremely important, in my opinion, is airflow to wick away the moisture. Most people think of winter as it's cold, I have to insulate my hives, I can't let any cold get in because those bees are going to have to work harder to warm the hive. Well, I have found just the opposite is true. I like lots of ventilation. If I could have every one of my hives be a screened bottom board, I would absolutely do that, and in fact I'm working towards that. As the years go by, I'm adding more and more screened bottom boards, less and less solid bottom boards. I do not use the mite insert for the mite count board, the corrugated board. I do not put that in during the winter time because I want that airflow. Without that airflow, the moisture created from those bees keeping the hive warm, that moisture goes up to the top of the hive, condensation builds up, and that moisture drips back down onto your cluster of bees, soaking the bees, possibly freezing and killing your bees. And without that ventilation, that moisture builds up mold in the hive. Last year, I went into winter with some good strong hives, and I lost 4 hives. Every one of my hives that I lost was a solid bottom board. So I am convinced that more ventilation is necessary for those hives. So I try to have good ventilation in all of my hives. I also have an upper entrance that I have on every single one of my hives. That helps with the airflow. It gives that upper entrance a spot for moist air to come out of the top. And it's also necessary, I feel, for the bees to continue to be able to come and go in the winter season. If you get a day that's 40 degrees in December or February, those bees are going to need a way to get out and pretty much take a poo flight. They will not defecate inside the hive, so they need to be able to get out of the hive on warmer days to take what they call a cleansing flight, or to go to the bathroom. They will hold it for weeks, maybe even months if they have to, but the minute it warms up enough, they come out like crazy and will use the bathroom. You may notice a large amount of poo on your hives. Probably not nosema, but you're going to notice that large amount of poo, and that's because all of a sudden it got warm enough in the wintertime, those bees all came out at once and pooped all at once. So don't be alarmed if you notice that on your hives early part of spring, maybe midwinter if we get a good heat wave. It happens. My entrance reducers right now are as small as I can get them to help prevent robbing. Robbing can completely decimate a hive if you have a huge yellow jacket problem. So they're as small as I can get them to help protect that hive and keep those bees happy and full of honey. Come probably January-ish, when we have enough snow on the ground, I pop those entrance reducers completely out. I completely remove them. The reason I do that then, when we have snow on the ground, is because this time of year, in the early part of the fall, the mice out in the wild are trying to find a spot to overwinter, and those mice would love to overwinter in your warm honey boxes. So come January, when we have 6 inches plus of snow on the ground, then those mice have already found their overwinter spot. They're not looking anymore. If they haven't found a spot to overwinter by now, they're probably dead. So I feel it's safe at that point to remove those entrance reducers, and that helps create the airflow. So your 3 main things that I mentioned again are your mite treatments, your honey stores, and your airflow in your hive. To help with that airflow, speaking of wasp, to help with the airflow, I do not wrap my hives at all. Get off my hair. A lot of people wrap. They get very creative with their wraps. Some people use tar paper, some people use plastic. I've seen people use saran wrap. I've seen people use actual insulation and insulation board. I don't wrap at all. The way my hive looks back here is exactly how it's going to look going into winter. I wrapped my hives my very first year, and I did not like doing it. I ended up with mouse nest in the wrap. I ended up with bugs and ants in the wrap. I ended up with moisture being held in the wrap, so the hive molded. Didn't like it. So I don't do it anymore, and I have not done it ever since that very first year. So I'm against wrap. Maybe in some areas you think it's absolutely necessary because it gets so cold. But I've had some like negative 20 degree windy days here in mid-Michigan, and I still don't wrap. I also do not, for the most part, use moisture boards or insulation boards on the top of my hives anymore. Again, did it my first year, did it my second year. I do it on and off. I have a bunch that I built, but I've never noticed a benefit. I've never taken off that insulation board and said, wow, this really benefited my hive. I have taken off moisture boards from this hive and then opened up a hive over here without a moisture board and thought these hives look the exact same. There was no point in this. So I don't use moisture boards for the most part anymore. Something that I do farther into winter, since I have that feeder rim on, I have a feeder rim for my upper entrance. It's sometimes called a feeder rim or an upper entrance shim. It's about a 1-inch piece of wood that fits all the way around the edge of my upper box, and then my inner cover goes on top of that rim, and my upper entrance is drilled or cut into those rims. and I will put down a piece of wax paper that does not cover the entire upper box. It does not cover the entire frames. Sometimes half, usually about a third of the frames get covered with this wax paper. And I'll put sugar bricks, or sometimes even just dry granulated sugar, on top of that wax paper. Um, if you're making sugar bricks, I strongly recommend that you make them and you bake them and you make them dry. A lot of people will make a sugar brick and it's too much moisture in it, so you're more playing with like a wet, sandy texture of sugar. They plop it on a paper plate or they plop it on wax paper, and they throw it on top of their hives, and you just added a ton of moisture to your hive by doing that those bees are going to have to deal with come wintertime. So if you're going to do sugar bricks, definitely make sure they're dry. Dry granulated sugar that's not even mixed with water, I do that. Sometimes midwinter I'll go in and I'll just pour in some dry granulated sugar, and the idea behind that is as your bees heat up your hive, the moisture that's going up from warming the hive gets on that dry granulated sugar and makes it into its own kind of sugar brick. Of course, it's not going to be the consistency that it would be if you boiled water, dried it out, baked it in the oven, but my bees eat it. My bees do go after that granulated sugar, so that's a good way to substitute feeds, so maybe the bees don't have to start eating their honey stores until December, or maybe they have that starting February to help get them through until March. You need to make sure that there's enough food in there, whether it's a sugar brick or dry sugar or just a ton of honey. You need to make sure there's enough food to get those bees through until March or April when the weather breaks, because early spring is when most people lose their hives from lack of food. The bees will starve out very easily once they become active in the spring and you start getting 40, 50 degree days. There's no nectar, there's no pollen, there's no anything yet for them to bring in, but they're flying around burning calories and burning carbs, and they don't have any food except what they stored to get them through winter. So now they're depleting what's in the hive, and next thing you know, your hive dies out early in April when you thought you had a successful overwinter. Then your hive dies out still from starvation. It's really sad to see. So as soon as the weather warms up to like the 40s, I make sure that there's sugar on top again. Give them that substitute feed. Another mistake that a lot of first-year beekeepers make that I've heard people complain to me about is they leave the queen excluders on their hives. They have their 2 brood boxes, they have a honey box that they think is just packed full of extra honey, and they leave a queen excluder between the brood and the honey. Your hive will die if you do that in the wintertime. Almost 100% guarantee. Your worker bees will work through that queen excluder to get to the honey up top, but that queen's not going to make it through that queen excluder. Naturally, that's what it does. It blocks the queen from going up, and the queen will die. She will freeze to death when all your other bees are up top. They're not going to stay down below to save her. It's survival of the hive, not survival of the queen. She will die, and then the hive will die along with it. So make sure all of your queen excluders are removed, or your hive will die just because you forgot to move the queen excluder. As far as pollen goes, I don't feed pollen at all until the weather warms up above mid-30s, or at least to the mid-30s in the evenings, and warmer during the daytime. So I wanted to stay in the 30s in the evenings and overnight before I start feeding pollen. Usually I feed the pollen via an open container with dry pollen substitute. I do have pollen patties that I'll throw on there, but I don't want to feed pollen too early because the pollen will stimulate the brood growth, and you don't want your queen laying too many eggs too early in the season. If your queen suddenly gets pollen in February and starts laying up entire frames, your worker bees will try to keep those entire frames of brood warm, and they will spread themselves out across those frames, and then they will all freeze to death and die, and you'll have frames of dead brood, frames of dead bees, and your hive will die from early brood production. So don't feed pollen too early. Wait till it is warm enough that you know that your bees can keep that extra brood warm. Speaking of brood, a lot of people talk about how their queens have stopped laying for the season already. It's not even October yet, and your bees have already stopped laying. My bees don't do that. I've never had that. Last year, I took the risk and I opened up a hive, and it was probably late December, early January, and I pulled out a couple frames of bees, and I still had brood in January. My queens, I've noticed, will continue to lay kind of within the cluster. So as your ball of bees or your cluster of bees works its way across and through the hive, that queen, or my queens at least, are still laying tiny little patches of brood, but it's still patches of brood. Small, like really small patches of brood. But I'm still getting new bees hatching out in the wintertime to help keep the population of bees growing consistently, or at least sustain it through the winter. So a lot of people I feel that say that their queens have stopped laying for the fall season, maybe your hive went queenless. Maybe that's the actual issue, because right now if I opened up one of my hives, I'd still have quite a bit of brood going in there, and I don't feel like it stops until it's like so cold out that there's no hope of keeping that brood alive. Probably like late January, early February. I know that mine are laying right through December at least. So my queens lay year round. So that's something. But they don't need extra pollen. They should have pollen mixed in on your honey frames. So it's not like I feed them pollen to sustain that brood. It's just naturally a thing they do. The lifespan of a bee is only so long, so my bees are laying eggs and raising brood to keep that bee population going. As those bees die throughout the winter, it's very natural also. Don't be alarmed if you go outside and see dead bees in the snow. Bees often will leave the hive to die. It's a courtesy kind of thing. Your bees don't have to drag out the carcasses. Bees will fly out just to die to help keep the hive clean. So don't be alarmed, like I said, if you see a bunch of dead bees there. You can also go out in the wintertime after you remove that entrance reducer, and I do this every year. I'll take like a small stick or something and I stick it inside the entrance of the hive down below, and I'll scrape out the dead bees. That will help keep that flow of air going, give your bees that are still alive a better chance of being able to come and go through that bottom board. And if you have a screen bottom board like mine are, it also gets the airflow going through the screen, and those dead bees create a lot of moisture. The bees naturally, of course, if you pop a bee, you're going to get liquid and goo that comes out. Dead bees, all that liquid and goo evaporates and creates moisture inside the hive that is working against the sustainability of your bees getting through winter. So, like I said, go in there, I scrape them out. I don't break apart the boxes or anything like that. I just stick a stick in, scrape out as many dead bees as I can, and just let them pile up out on the ground. The other pro to that is if you have bees that maybe died from a sickness or with mites on them, you're scraping all those mites or that sickness out of the hive as opposed to just letting it sit in there and fester. You'll also have way less mold in the hive if you scrape out those bees, and the smell of the dead bees is less likely to attract mice and other pests. So I do that every year. I always go out maybe once every 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and I scrape out any dead bees that I can from those hives. I feel like it really helps the hive get through winter better for multiple reasons. So make sure that you're doing your winter prep. Make sure that your bees are set and ready to go into winter. If you have to feed, start feeding. It's not too late. If you haven't done a mite treatment yet, do it. Get whatever you can. If they're out of stock of the Formic Pro that you wanted to use, buy Apigard. If they're out of stock of Apigard, get some kind of oxalic acid. If you can't get a gun to do the vapor, do the dribble. Do some kind of mite treatment. Your hives have a very low success rate without a mite treatment. And then the other thing is, absolutely, you have to have good airflow for those bees. Otherwise, they're going to build up that moisture and they're going to die inside those hives. Hopefully, you find all of this information very helpful. I get tons of questions on it, so I thought I'd do a quick video so people could reference it if they wanted to. Hopefully it helps. And if you ever have any questions on what I do for my bees, or what I don't do for my bees, always feel free to shoot me a message. I love talking bee talk, so always feel free to shoot me a message. Ask me the question, whether it's through text, whether it's through email, whatever the source is. I never mind helping somebody out and giving at least my opinion on how I manage my hives. So with that, thanks for watching, thanks for listening to me ramble on about winter prep. It's very important to me that my hives make it through winter. Hopefully it is probably to you. And it's also a very scary topic for a new beekeeper or a seasoned beekeeper that consistently loses all of their hives for one reason or another. So yeah, with that, I'm going to end the video. Thanks for watching, and good luck with the end of this bee season.